She was failing every combat drill. The obstacle course wall, slick with morning dew and indifference, rejected her grip. Her boots, stiff and new, skidded on the mud-caked logs of the balance beam. During the marksmanship test, her shots were erratic, grouping loosely in the outer rings of the target, a performance that earned a sigh of disgust from the supervising sergeant. For 3 weeks at Forward Operating Base Kestrel, nestled in a valley that bled tension, Master Warrant Officer Anya Volkov was a ghost, a bureaucratic error given a uniform. The younger soldiers, honed by repetition and fueled by nervous energy, saw a woman past her prime, soft and slow, a liability waiting for a place to happen. They jogged past her on the perimeter track, their strides long and confident, while she maintained a steady, almost placid pace, her breathing even, her eyes not on the path ahead but scanning the ridgeline, the heat shimmer, the flight of a distant hawk. Her failure was quiet, consistent, and profoundly public. It was a source of whispered jokes in the mess hall and open frustration from her immediate superiors. They couldn't understand her presence. Her file was a ghost story of redactions, a career of paper pushing in obscure logistical departments, or so it seemed. Yet here she was, mandated to participate in readiness exercises she so clearly could not complete. The disconnect was a constant, low-grade irritant to the base's rigid operational rhythm. And for Anya, the failure was a choice. It was a language. It was a shield. But the quiet was about to break, and the nature of her true test was hurtling toward them, unseen, under the vast, uncaring sky. She felt it in the air, a change in pressure that had nothing to do with the weather. The summons came as she knew it would. Colonel Madsen's office was a monument to order. His desk was a polished expanse of dark wood, cleared of everything but a perfectly squared blotter, a single pen, and her personnel file. Madsen himself was cut from the same cloth. Uniform sharply pressed, jaw tight, eyes the color of a winter sky. He did not ask her to sit. He tapped a manicured finger on the thin folder. Master Warrant Officer Volkov, it was not a greeting. It was an accusation. I've reviewed your file, or what's left of it. He let the sentence hang in the sterile, air-conditioned space. Logistics, supply chain analysis, procurement oversight. For 20 years. Then you request a forward deployment. To hear, he looked up, his gaze sweeping over her, cataloging the standard-issue uniform that seemed to hang on her frame, the graying strands at her temples, the placid set of her mouth. With all due respect, ma'am, this is a combat outpost, not a retirement depot. My people are young, sharp. They need to trust that the person next to them can pull their weight. Anya's gaze remained fixed on a point just over his shoulder, a map of the region pinned to the wall. Her posture was relaxed, hands clasped loosely behind her back. I understand, sir. Her voice was low, devoid of inflection. It was the voice of a clerk, not a soldier. Madsen's jaw tightened further. He despised that placid tone. It felt like a mockery of his own coiled intensity. Do you? Your performance in the readiness drills is, to be blunt, abysmal. You can't clear the wall. You can't maintain pace. Your marksmanship is below recruit standards. I have young privates here who could run circles around you. He leaned forward, his weight on his knuckles. I need to know why you are here. The paperwork from Central Command is vague. It mentions transitional assessment and field observation. I'm not running a social experiment, Volkov. I'm running a goddamn firebase on the edge of the world. Anya's eyes flickered to his. Just for a second. The stillness in her gaze was unnerving. It wasn't defiant. It was analytical. It was the look of a jeweler assessing a flawed stone. My orders are to observe and integrate. Colonel, integrate. He gave a short, sharp laugh that was more of a bark. You're integrating like oil in water. The NCOs are complaining. They see you as dead weight. Morale is a weapon, warrant officer. And you are dulling the blade. He picked up her file and let it drop back onto the desk. The sound was a small, flat punctuation of his contempt. I've filed a request with command for your immediate transfer. Until I receive a reply, you will be confined to administrative duties within the wire. No more drills. No more wasting my instructor's time. You can observe from the mess hall. Is that clear? Yes, sir. He waited for more. An argument, a defense, an excuse. He received nothing but the same quiet compliance. It was infuriating. It was like shouting at a fog bank. Dismissed, he snapped, turning his attention back to the pristine surface of his desk. A clear signal that she no longer occupied a single moment of his valuable time. Anya turned with an economy of motion that was almost graceful and walked out, the door closing with a soft click behind her, leaving the colonel stewing in a silence that felt louder than their conversation. Confined to administrative duties, Anya became an even quieter part of the base's scenery. She was a shadow in the mess hall, a still point in the bustling command center, a silent presence near the motor pool. But she was not idle. Her observation, now unrestricted by the performative failure of the drills, became sharper, more focused. She wasn't looking at the soldiers anymore. She was looking at the base as a single, living organism, and she was mapping its vulnerabilities. She spent an hour one morning near the primary generator, ostensibly reading a technical manual. What she was actually doing was tracing the thick, bundled power cables and the exposed fuel lines that ran along the inside of the western perimeter wall. She noted the lack of a secondary blast shield and the single, easily compromised digital lock on the fuel cistern. She memorized the maintenance schedule tacked to the generator's housing. A two-man crew, every Tuesday and Friday at 0900. Predictable. From a shaded bench overlooking the main gate, she watched the guard rotations. They were precise, by the book. A four-person team relieved every 4 hours. But the handoff was sloppy. For a period of roughly 90 seconds, as one team departed and the other settled in, the guard's attention was internal, focused on the transfer of information and equipment. Their eyes were off the approaches. 90 seconds was an eternity. She sat in the communications hub for an entire afternoon, a cup of lukewarm coffee growing cold in her hands. The young specialists, Corporal Evans and Private Chen, chattered about sports and home, their fingers flying over keyboards. Anya listened to the hum of the servers, the cadence of the radio checks, the subtle difference in audio quality between the encrypted long-range network and the local line-of-sight comms. She noted the primary comms array on the roof, a dense cluster of dishes and antennae. And she noted the backup relay, a smaller, less conspicuous dish on a separate building near the infirmary, its sightline partially obscured by a water tower. She walked the perimeter, her placid pace unchanged. She wasn't looking for enemy soldiers on the ridgeline. She was feeling the wind. She noted how the valley's unique topography created channels, funnels for sound. A disturbance in the northern gorge would be almost inaudible at the south gate, while a whisper from the eastern flats could carry directly to the command center. She saw the blind spots in the camera coverage, tiny wedges of shadow behind supply containers and temporary barracks. She saw the drainage culvert under the southern fence, its grating secured by 2 standard bolts, rusted from the constant damp. She wasn't just seeing a base. She was seeing an attack surface. Every predictable schedule, every unshielded cable, every moment of lax attention was a foothold for a potential enemy. The base was strong, but it was rigid. It was a creature of habit, and habit was a weakness she understood better than anyone. The soldiers saw a slow old woman. She saw a puzzle box, and she was quietly, methodically learning how to take it apart. The pressure began not as a roar, but as a whisper of static. At 2:13, the lights in the Tactical Operations Center, TOC, flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the room into the eerie green glow of emergency backup lighting. A collective grunt of annoyance went through the night shift crew. Then Corporal Evans, his face pale in the chemical light, ripped off his headset. "Sir, I've lost all comms. Everything. Long range, local, satlink. It's just white noise." Colonel Madsen, roused from his cot, stormed into the TOC, pulling on his jacket. "What's the problem, Evans? Weather." "No, sir. This isn't weather. It's too clean. It's like someone just threw a switch." A second voice, shrill with panic, cut through the room. "Perimeter alarms. Sector 4. Motion detected at the wire." Madsen's head snapped toward the tactical map, a digital display that was now a mess of frozen, pixelated data. Get me a visual. Someone get those damn screens rebooted. But the screens were dead. The network was down. The eyes and ears of the base had been severed in a single silent stroke. Then the first explosion hit. It wasn't the crump of a mortar, but a deep, concussive whump that shook the very foundations of the building. The emergency lights flickered again. A shower of dust and ceiling tiles rained down. "Report," Madsen bellowed, his voice tight with a control that was already fraying. A runner, a young private with wild eyes, burst through the door. "Sir, the generator. It's gone. The whole west wall is dark." Panic began to curdle the air in the TOC. Another runner appeared. "Mortar fire, coming from the north ridge. They're bracketing the barracks." "No, wait," another voice shouted. "Gunfire from the south. Heavy machine guns near the main gate." Contradictory reports flooded the room, delivered by breathless soldiers sprinting between the dark, silent stations. The base was being hit from multiple directions, but without communications or sensors, they were blind. Madsen stood in the center of the chaos, his face a mask of fury and confusion. His rigid, by-the-book world had shattered. Standard protocols were useless. How do you coordinate a defense when you can't talk to your defenders? How do you fight an enemy you can't see? "Get a hard line to the platoon leaders," he ordered. "Send runners to every position. I want a sit rep now." But the runners were being pinned down by sporadic, accurate sniper fire that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The enemy wasn't just attacking. They were dissecting the base's nervous system, exploiting the very procedural responses Madsen relied on. The pressure was mounting, a physical weight in the suffocating room. The calm, orderly machine of FOB Kestrel had descended into a frantic, headless scramble for survival. Madsen's commands grew louder, more desperate, chasing phantom threats while the real ones tightened their grip in the darkness. Into this vortex of escalating chaos, Anya Volkov walked. She didn't run. Her pace was the same steady, deliberate one she used on the perimeter track. She moved through the panicked bodies in the TOC like a stone in a rushing stream, the current of fear parting around her. No one noticed her at first. She was just the old woman, the ghost, out of place as always. She stopped beside the useless, dark tactical map. Her eyes, accustomed to the dim light, scanned the room, taking in every detail. Madsen's flushed face, Evans's frantic attempts to find a clear channel, the runner's terrified expressions. She saw not chaos, but a pattern, a beautifully executed strategy of induced paralysis. She reached over to a small, forgotten whiteboard used for daily rosters and picked up a red dry erase marker. The cap came off with a soft squeak that cut through the noise with impossible clarity. Several heads turned. Madsen glared at her. "What in God's name do you think you're doing, warrant officer? Get out of my TOC." Anya ignored him. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Corporal Evans," she said, her tone level and calm. Evans looked up, startled to be addressed so directly. "That backup relay near the infirmary. It runs on a separate power grid tied to the medical bay's emergency batteries. Is that correct?" Evans blinked. Yes, ma'am. But its line of sight is partially blocked by the water tower." Anya finished for him. "And the enemy knows that. They're jamming broad spectrum, but they're focusing their power on the primary array. They're assuming we're too stupid to try the degraded asset." She turned to a stunned runner. "Find me a spool of comms wire, 50 meters, and a lineman's handset." Now, without waiting for a response, she began to draw on the whiteboard. She didn't draw the base as it was. She drew a schematic of the attack. A large circle over the main comms tower. Primary jammer, a series of X's along the west wall. Diversionary strike on the generator. They wanted the lights out, another set of X's near the barracks. Psychological. Pin down reinforcements, create confusion. Then she drew a series of small, insidious arrows pointing toward the TOC itself, originating from the south and east. "This is the real attack. Pincer. They aren't trying to overrun the base. They're trying to decapitate it. They want this room. She looked at Madsen, her eyes holding his for the first time. There was no defiance in them. No, I told you so. There was only the cold, hard fact of the situation. You've sent your runners out into a kill box, Colonel. The sniper fire isn't random. It's hurting them. Her efficiency was baffling. Her analysis delivered with the dispassionate air of a lecturer. In the space of 30 seconds, she had articulated a coherent picture from the chaos that had paralyzed Madsen's entire command staff. She wasn't bragging. She was simply stating the truth. A moment of stunned silence hung in the TOC. Colonel Madsen stared at the whiteboard, at the simple, brutal logic of Anya's drawing. Every contradictory report, every chaotic event, suddenly clicked into a terrifyingly coherent picture. His mind raced, his pride warring with the undeniable truth laid out before him. His instinct, honed by years of command, was to crush this insubordination. To have this woman, this failed warrant officer, physically removed. He opened his mouth to give the order, his face a thunderous mask. Sergeant, escort. But before he could finish, a new report. This one screamed from the doorway by a breathless corporal validated Anya's drawing. Sir, we've got contact at the south gate. They're using the supply containers for cover. It's a coordinated assault team. The exact point Anya had indicated with her insidious red arrows. Madsen's mouth snapped shut. He looked from the terrified corporal to the calm woman with the marker, and then back to the map she had drawn. It was no longer a theory. It was a prophecy being fulfilled in real time. The shift in the room was palpable. It was a change in atmospheric pressure. The frantic energy began to coalesce around Anya, a new center of gravity. Corporal Evans, who had been staring at her with wide, disbelieving eyes, suddenly galvanized. He turned to Private Chen. She's right. The infirmary grid. Get me that wire, now. Move. Chen, who a day before had been mocking Anya's slow jogging pace, scrambled out of the room as if his life depended on it, which it very well might. Madsen remained frozen for another heartbeat, the foundations of his worldview crumbling. This woman, this administrative cast-off, had seen the shape of the battle from the first whisper of static. She hadn't needed $1 million sensor suite. She had used her eyes and her mind. He was a commander of systems. She was a commander of situations. Reluctantly, with a wave of his hand that felt like a physical defeat, he gestured toward the whiteboard. Continue, he bit out, the single word costing him an immense amount of pride. The tone in the TOC changed. The panic didn't vanish, but it was replaced by a focused, desperate curiosity. The junior officers and NCOs stopped running in circles and turned their attention to Anya. They looked at her not as a failure but as a lifeline. The scorn was gone, replaced by a dawning, fearful awe. Who was this woman? Where did she come from? Anya showed no sign of noticing their changed attitude. She was already moving on, her focus absolute. The sniper fire, she said, her voice still low and even. It's designed to suppress, to channel. It's too precise for conscripts. They have a spotter, likely on the eastern ridge, using the sound funnel of the valley to mask their position. I need a 3-man team, not your best shots, your quietest movers. Send them out the culvert under the south fence. She tapped the spot on her hand-drawn map. They won't be looking there. They'll expect a response from the main gate. Madsen stared, his own tactical playbook feeling like a children's book in comparison. He nodded slowly, the motion stiff, and relayed the order. The tide hadn't turned, but for the first time since the lights went out, they were no longer drowning. They were fighting back. The enemy, sensing the shift from panicked reaction to coordinated defense, escalated. They had lost the element of surprise and now pressed their advantage in numbers and firepower. This was the second test, the main event. A coordinated barrage of rocket-propelled grenades slammed into the south wall, targeting the precise weak point Anya had identified days ago during her silent walks. The section of wall whose observation was partially blocked by a row of temporary barracks. The explosions were deafening, a physical force that buckled the TOC's reinforced door. Breach! Breach in Sector 7. A voice screamed over the makeshift hardline Evans had jury-rigged to a platoon sergeant's handset. "They're pouring through." This was the pincer closing. The assault team at the gate was a feint, designed to draw defenders, while the true breach came from the flank. It was a classic, well-executed maneuver designed to collapse the perimeter and swarm the command center. Madsen, now almost a spectator in his own TOC, looked to Anya. His face was a mixture of fear and grudging reliance. In the midst of this new, intense chaos, a new sound intruded, the percussive thwump-thwump-thwump of heavy rotor blades, dangerously close. It was a sound no one expected to hear. Through a slit in the blast shutters, they could see the landing lights of a Black Hawk helicopter descending rapidly toward the only clear space near the TOC, a small, debris-strewn parade ground. It was a reckless, almost suicidal landing, coming down in the middle of a firefight. "Who the hell is that?" Madsen breathed. The helicopter touched down, its rotors kicking up a storm of dust and gravel. The side door slid open and a figure leaped out, not waiting for the ramp. He was tall, wearing a general's star on his collar, his face grim and set. It was General Thorne, the theater commander, a man known for his intolerance of failure. He sprinted toward the TOC, his aides struggling to keep up, ignoring the tracers zipping through the air around them. Thorne burst through the door, his eyes blazing, taking in the scene of controlled chaos. He saw the emergency lighting, the jury-rigged comms, the wounded being triaged in a corner. He saw a pale but resolute Colonel Madsen. And he saw a woman in a standard-issue uniform, her back to him, calmly drawing lines on a whiteboard, issuing quiet, precise orders to a rapt audience of young soldiers. "Colonel Madsen, what is the meaning of this? My entire command network says this base has gone dark. Report." Thorne's voice was a whip crack. Madsen straightened, his training taking over. "General Thorne, we are under a complex, coordinated attack. Comms and sensors are down. He trailed off as Thorne's gaze fixed on Anya. The general's eyes narrowed, his head tilting slightly. He wasn't looking at her uniform or her rank. He was looking at the way she stood, the economy of her movements as she corrected a line on the board, the absolute stillness at her core while the world exploded around her. He saw something he hadn't seen in a decade, a ghost from a different, darker world. Madsen, feeling the general's critical gaze upon him, tried to reassert control. He saw the order Anya had just given, to pull the last fire team from the north wall, a section that was currently quiet, and move them to counter the breach in Sector 7. To his conventional mind, it was madness. It meant leaving an entire flank theoretically undefended. "Warrant officer, that's an unacceptable risk." Madsen's voice was sharp, regaining a fraction of its former authority. "We hold the line on all fronts. We do not voluntarily create a weak point." He stepped forward, ready to grab the handset and countermand the order himself. General Thorne's hand shot out, grabbing Madsen's arm in a grip of iron. "Colonel, stand down." The command was spoken quietly, but it held an absolute, chilling authority that made Madsen freeze in place. Thorne's eyes never left Anya. He walked forward slowly, his boots crunching on fallen ceiling tiles. The din of the battle outside seemed to fade, the entire TOC holding its breath. He stopped a few feet behind her. She didn't turn. She continued to analyze the flow of the battle on her whiteboard, her focus absolute. Thorne watched her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. He saw the way she held the marker, not like a pen, but like a scalpel. He saw the way her gaze darted between the board and the terrified face of the comms operator, her mind processing information at a speed he recognized with a jolt of profound shock. It was her. After all these years, it was really her. The general's face hardened. All ambiguity vanished, replaced by the grim certainty of a man about to unleash a force of nature. He took a deep breath, his voice ringing out, clear and powerful, overriding every other sound in the room. A command that was also a revelation. "Execute Protocol Winter Sparrow." The words struck the room like a physical blow. Profound, absolute silence fell. Even the distant chatter of gunfire seemed to die away. Corporal Evans dropped his handset. Private Chun stared, his mouth agape. The sergeants and junior officers froze, their faces blank with confusion. It was a phrase none of them had ever heard. It meant nothing to them. But to Colonel Madsen and to the general's aide, it meant everything. Madsen's face, already pale, turned the color of ash. His eyes widened in horrified understanding. Winter Sparrow. It wasn't a protocol. It was a person. A legend. A ghost story whispered in the highest, most classified circles of intelligence and special operations. A name associated with impossible missions, with the quiet toppling of regimes, with a level of lethality and strategic genius that was mythical. It was a deep cover activation phrase, a kill switch for a dormant asset, a command that meant all rules of engagement, all conventions, all constraints were now null and void. He had been berating a living weapon. He had been ordering a ghost to mop the floors. At the sound of the name, the command, her name, Anya Volkov, went still for a single fractional second. It was the only outward sign she gave. Then, something inside her shifted. It was a change as subtle and as total as a lens snapping into focus. The quiet, observant clerk vanished. The stoic, underestimated woman receded. What was left was Winter Sparrow. Her shoulders squared almost imperceptibly. Her eyes, when she finally turned to look at General Thorne, were different. The placid warmth was gone, replaced by a chilling, analytical cold. They were the eyes of a predator that has just been unleashed. She gave the general a single, sharp nod. It was not a gesture of subordination. It was an acknowledgement of a shared, bloody history. Then she turned back to the chaos she was now mandated to command absolutely. Her voice, when she spoke again, was transformed. The quiet, low tone was gone, replaced by a clipped, rapid-fire cadence that demanded and received instant obedience. Evans, that sniper spotter on the eastern ridge. The team I sent is in position. Give me their frequency. I'll talk to them myself. Evans fumbled with his equipment, his fingers clumsy with awe. Chun, divert all remaining power from non-essential sectors to the infirmary's surgical suite lighting. I want them to light up the water tower. Now, ma'am. Chun stammered, confused. The water tower blocks the backup relay, Anya snapped, not unkindly. But it's also the best high-ground reflection point on this base. The enemy is flooding the primary array with broad-spectrum noise. They won't be listening for a single high-gain signal bounced off a water tank. She was turning the base's own weaknesses into weapons. To Colonel Madsen, she said without turning, Colonel, your men at the main gate are about to be flanked from the west. The initial strike on the generator wasn't just a diversion. It was to clear a path. Get them moving back toward the TOC. Form a concentric defense around this building. Use the motor pool vehicles as hard cover. Every order was precise, unorthodox, and brilliant. She was playing three-dimensional chess while they had been playing checkers. Colonel Madsen, his face a complex mask of shock, shame, and dawning, profound respect, simply said, Yes, ma'am. He turned and began relaying her orders. His own voice now an instrument of her will. He moved with a crispness he hadn't shown all night. He was a soldier again, following a commander he now understood was far beyond his measure. He walked past the general and, without stopping, rendered a salute. It was a perfect, textbook motion, a gesture of absolute deference from a man who, an hour ago, had dismissed her as useless. The other soldiers in the room, seeing their colonel's action and finally understanding the magnitude of the shift in power, straightened their own postures. The awe had transformed into something harder, something forged in the fire of combat. Respect. The air crackled with it. They were no longer a panicked mob. They were the instruments of Winter Sparrow, and under her command, the brutal, final phase of the defense began. The battle turned, not slowly, but with the vicious speed of a striking snake. Anya's commands were a blur of lethal efficiency. She spoke directly to the three-man team near the sniper's nest, her voice a low murmur, guiding them by sound and shadow. 20 meters to your left. Patch of scree. He's bedded down behind it. His spotter is 5 meters above him. Take the spotter first. Use the knife. The shot will give away your position. There was a pause. Then a single, muffled crack of a suppressed rifle shot echoed faintly over the comms, followed by silence. The harassing sniper fire that had pinned down the base for an hour stopped instantly. She directed the fire of the mortars, not at the breach, but in a walking barrage behind it, cutting off the enemy's line of retreat. She used the illuminated water tower to bounce a single, encrypted data burst to a drone circling 30,000 feet overhead. A drone no one on the base even knew was there. Within minutes, the drone's high-resolution infrared feed filled a spare monitor Evans had powered up, painting a stark, godlike view of the entire valley in black and white. There, Anya said, tapping the screen. A cluster of heat signatures was gathered in a wadi a kilometer away. The enemy's command element. General, she said, her tone flat, requesting fire mission on these coordinates. Danger close. General Thorne simply keyed his personal comms. Skyhammer, this is Big Thorne. Fire mission, priority 1 inch. The response from the heavens was a string of silent, falling stars on the monitor, followed by a series of deep, earth-shattering thuds that rolled through the valley. The enemy command element vanished from the screen. With their leadership decapitated and their retreat cut off, the remaining attackers, caught between the breach and the base's resurgent defenders, broke. The assault dissolved into a desperate, futile scramble. The fight wasn't over, but it was won. By the time the first hint of gray lightened the eastern sky, the last shots had been fired. The silence that fell was heavy, profound, broken only by the crackle of fires and the distant cries of the wounded. The respect in the TOC was no longer a fresh, shocking thing. It was a solid, immutable fact. Matson stood by the door, his uniform disheveled, his face smeared with grime, but his posture was that of a subordinate. He watched Anya as she finally put down the red marker, her work done. When a medical team came in to check on the staff, they approached her first. She waved them off, directing them to a young private who had been hit by a piece of shrapnel. Corporal Evans, his face etched with exhaustion and reverence, brought her a bottle of water. He didn't say a word. He just placed it on the table in front of her and backed away slowly, as if leaving an offering at an altar. The public recognition was complete, silent, and absolute. It had been earned not with words or rank, but with the cold, undeniable calculus of survival. The sun rose over the ravaged landscape of FOB Kestrel, its light catching the smoke that still drifted from the burned-out husks of vehicles and the smoldering generator. The base had held. The cost was written in the faces of the medics and the solemn lines of the body recovery teams. In the quiet aftermath, Anya Volkov stood alone on the small balcony outside the TOC, looking out not at the destruction, but at the unbroken line of the distant mountains. The air was cold and clean, smelling of ozone, cordite, and damp earth. She was no longer Winter Sparrow. She was just Anya again. The transformation back was as quiet and internal as the one that had preceded it. She held a single, spent shell casing in her palm. It was a 762 millimeters round, brass, still warm. She had picked it up from the floor of the TOC, a small, tangible piece of the night's violence. The door opened behind her. It was General Thorne. He came and stood beside her, following her gaze to the horizon. They stood in silence for a long time, the quiet companionship of people who had shared things that could not be spoken. "They'll be talking about this from here to Central Command," Thorne said finally, his voice low. "You saved this entire outpost, Anya." She didn't respond, just turned the casing over and over in her fingers. "There's a place for you," he continued. "A real place, not this a masquerade. I can make the call. You could be back in the fold by tomorrow." Anya looked at the shell casing, at its small, perfect geometry of purpose. She had been that once. A tool perfectly designed for a specific, violent function. She thought of the drills she had failed, the slow pace, the missed shots. That had been a kind of peace. A quiet rebellion against the muscle memory that still screamed within her. She held out her hand, offering the casing to the general. He looked at it, then at her face. He understood. It was a souvenir, a memento, a period at the end of a sentence. He took it, his fingers closing around the warm metal. "Understood," he said softly. He gave a final brief nod, a gesture of profound, personal respect that went far beyond military protocol, and left her alone. Anya remained on the balcony as the base slowly came back to life. The hum of a backup generator started up. The shouts of work crews began to replace the sounds of battle. She watched it all, a solitary figure against the growing light. She had proven nothing to herself she didn't already know. But in the eyes of the soldiers who now passed below, who looked up and offered a slow nod or a hesitant salute, she saw her reflection. They no longer saw a failure. They saw a quiet woman, standing in the morning sun, her dignity intact, her value proven, her silence once again her own.